going to have in and around CSW68. I'm so proud of our team, led by Luisa and Rosa, and our interns, our project coordinators, Rachel and Annabelle, and our intern, Carla, for putting this information together. Ivy, do you want to say a few words? Okay, at this time, we'd like to take a poll. And if we could move to the next slide, please. How much experience do you have advocating with member states nationally or locally? And this is such an important question because that's really what we come to CSW to do. We come for advocacy. We come to talk to member states. We come to talk to other advocates, and we come to strategize. So how many times have you attended CSW? Is this your first time? Have you been here more than once? And think about it. Do you have some advocacy experience? Do you have a lot? Do you have a little? Okay, can we show the results? So for 63% of our audience, this is their first time. And that's pretty incredible because you are in for such an interesting time from today forward to March 22nd. It's going to be incredible. Can you show the results again, please? And then we have 32% who have been here multiple times. So welcome back. And we hope that today's session will be valuable for you as well. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Louisa Kissinger and Rosa Lazard.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're connecting from. My name is Luisa Kissinger, and I work for the United Nations Foundation. I'm a senior manager of the Girls and Women's team, but I'm also part of the executive committee of NGO CSW. So it is a pleasure to welcome you this morning. And first of all, I would like to say that we have very little times, and we know that you have a lot of questions. So we would encourage you to, as we progress on the program that we have for you today, to share your questions or to place your questions in the chat box. And me and my colleague Rosa and all of our wonderful colleagues from NGO CSW will be answering your questions in the chat box to the extent possible. So this is the agenda of the presentation that we're going to have for you today from a substantive point of view. My colleague Rosa is going to also present the more critical part of the presentation around the thematic issue connected to this year's CSW priority theme. But if we can move to the next slide, let's start with advocating around CSW. And these are skills that can be used in other spaces, but we are going to be focusing on CSW specifically because this is what is gathering us here today, of course. So the first thing that we want to say is trying to understand what kind of advocate you are or what kind of strategy and tactics you want to use. When I say this, I also have to share with you that CSW is about the outcome document, of course, and the great conclusions that come out of it. But CSW is not only about that. It's also about connecting with others. It's about presenting some of your issues. And there are moments in which your issues might not make it into the final outcome document, but some organizations and some advocates come to CSW not only to see their priorities reflected in the outcome document, but also to highlight some critical issues that they want to, put in the public discourse at the global level. Like you want to highlight a particular situation in a particular country that women and girls are facing, in a particular context of the lack of funding that some civil society organizations are facing in a particular country or region. So this is also an opportunity to connect, to learn from each other, to create a critical mass around the gender equality agenda globally that you can also bring back to the regions and to the countries. So why am I saying this is because one of the strategies that is possible to use is digital advocacy. So if you have your priorities as your organization and you want to share with member states, with the UN system, and with others, you can use social media to produce and to put out some of your messaging and to highlight those issues, and also to highlight your events and some of the things that you're doing in the context of CSW every year when you come here. That's one alternative that you have. And then around CSW, there are several coalitions and civil society partners like NGO CSW that have a lot of a wealth of knowledge and contacts and of possibilities for you to connect with them. So we would encourage you that instead of going to it on your own, you can benefit from connecting with all of these other advocates and also coalitions. NGO CSW is a perfect example. You can get information and connections and contacts to advance your advocacy goals. But NGO CSW is not the only coalition that coordinates and works around CSW. There are others. So we encourage you to also ask questions, ask other advocates, and we would be happy also to share which are the other coalitions, like the Women's Rights Caucus that does a more concentrated, like focused kind of advocacy around the outcome documents. So you can connect with them and understand that you are not alone in this process, and you can benefit from these connections. And sometimes through these coalitions and connections, you can also hear about informal discussions where you can get information around the substantive discussions happening in CSW. Like, for instance, the chair of CSW offers a briefing, or the Bureau or UN Women offers a briefing on CSW. You can hear through those coalitions the information. If you can attend, sometimes they share a readout of these informal discussions, but it's good for you also to attend to these informal discussions to the extent possible to get that information, and to also present your advocacy priorities, right? Then in the two little icons that we have at the bottom of the screen, you will see that one is the outcome document. And as I said at the beginning, not everyone who comes to New York or who engages, because not everyone engages in New York only. Some people don't, unfortunately, some can make it, and some decide not to come to New York, but that doesn't mean that you don't engage with CSW. So, but some people opt to engage with the outcome document, and we are going to analyze in my next slide a little bit about that. But before going into the negotiation process, it is important to also speak about the level of engagement with government officials. So when you are going to engage on CSW, we have to understand that CSW is an intergovernmental process, meaning that it is governments, the ones that sit down to negotiate the agreed conclusions. So it is important for you to see that it would be beneficial to have or to strike these relations with government officials. And those relations can be at the local level, at the regional level, or at the global level. At the local level, it could be with the Minister for Foreign Affairs that is leading some of the instructions that come to New York that diplomats here negotiating will have. but you could also engage with your national machinery for gender equality, whether it is a ministry or a National Institute of Women and Girls or gender. So you could try to engage with these government officials ahead of CSW so that you can also advance your advocacy goals and work with them ahead of CSW. And we're going to look into a little later in the program, we're going to see that we'll also have some recommendations for you for after CSW. So, but we also acknowledge the fact that not everyone has access to their government officials. So New York presents the opportunity for those who make it and can come to New York. They can speak to some government officials here in New York, sometimes in the context of an event. When the event is over, you can come up to government officials and speak to them. So there are all these opportunities in which you can engage with them, but always understanding that the center of CSW is an intergovernmental process. So if you want to influence the outcome document, it is important for you to engage with government officials. Next slide, please. So this is roughly how you can engage with the negotiation process. So it is important for you to have clarity in terms of the issues that you want to promote, your advocacy goals, and then to create some language recommendations that you can then share with member states. But when you're sharing with member states, it is important to understand who is your ally, because not all members of the UN are going to be amicable to your advocacy goals. So for instance, if you're advocating for SRHR, you need to understand that not every member state in the UN is amicable to push for that or to advance that. The same goes with, like if you were advocating for certain issues around economic justice, we understand that certain global north countries might not be amicable to one of those, some of those issues. So you need to do a mapping and understanding who are your allies within this constellation of member states, who can you work with, which is the government that will be more amicable to work with your advocacy proposals and your messaging. So the mapping can be done, through public information. You go into Google and you can find some of the statements that these member states have made in the past in UN corridors, and in UN, not corridors, in UN official meetings. So then you can understand who are your allies. And then when you come to New York and you are in these spaces, you can, or prior to that, if possible for you, you can reach out to them and share your recommendations and your language and your priorities. So the same you can do on social media. Sometimes you can come up with this with your language recommendations, and if you go on social media, you can tag those amicable member states who might be willing to push for your priorities and advocacy goals. And then you can meet with member states prior to coming to New York, but then in New York, you can meet with those that are amicable here in New York, with those permanent missions. And then throughout the process of the negotiations, you can meet with them and try to get a temperature check in where are the negotiations, how things are going, and how can you provide them with maybe language recommendations, that alternatives that they can use during the negotiations. Next slide, please. So this is just a very rough overview, and we are short in time, so I'm just not going to stop a lot on this, but this is more or less the way in which the outcome document process happens. So around October, November, there is an expert group meeting that UN Women puts together. So the experts do the recommendations around the priority theme. Then sometime based on the expert group meeting, the Secretary General's report comes out around the priority theme for CSW, and this happens every year. So around this time in January, the Secretary General report comes out, and then shortly after that, the zero draft. The zero draft is the first draft that comes out for the agreed conclusions. So it comes right after the Secretary General's report, and then the facilitator, which this year is going to be the Netherlands, sends out the zero draft, and then it starts collecting some feedback from member states, and then it comes up with something that is called the compilation text. And then the negotiations start, and then there is a first reading, meaning that all member states have an opportunity to present in the context of a meeting their views on the draft. And then after that process is finished, the facilitators have circulated this compilation text reflecting all the views of member states. And then there is a revision one, meaning it is the draft has now been through this process of receiving comments, and then the facilitator produces the ref one, and then it might go into another round of negotiations in the room, listening to the views of member states, and then there might be another ref 2 and successive documents. So just to say that as the process advances, the window for suggestion shrinks. So the moment in which you can add, as many language proposals as possible is at the zero draft or pre-zero draft sometimes. But just to say that when the process has advanced, then there is very little room for coming up with new language and new proposals. So if you're going to present, if you're going to engage with the document, with the outcome document, make sure that you try to be ready with your language recommendations very early in the game, so that member states can advance those language recommendations that you're putting forward into the zero draft or the compilation text process. Next slide, please. So, and then after CSW, it would be very important, and this is something that some of us collectively have sort of overlooked over the time, and we thought it would be important to bring it back. So after CSW, what happens? So civil society is in an excellent position to demand action and to ensure that the agreed conclusions are implemented. A way of doing that is creating spaces when you go back home to disseminate the agreed conclusions and what is being said and what governments have committed to do in the context of those agreed conclusions. And then you can engage with government officials at the local level, sort of asking them what are their plans to implement the agreed conclusions. You can demand action. And then again, going back to the issue of digital advocacy, you can do that through social media, but you can also set up these meetings and have, different creative ways of demanding action. And also, of course, the document implementation, you can, analyze different parts of the agreed conclusions and where action is needed, and engage with government officials again to try to create awareness about the need for the government and for other government institutions to act on the implementation of these commitments that governments have made in the context of agreed conclusions here in New York. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Rosa, who's now going to speak about more specifically to the priority theme of this year's CSW. So Rosa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Luisa. It's so great to see so many of you here and so many questions, so many greetings. I'm Rosa Lizardi. I'm the Global Director of the Feminist Task Force. And with said, I'm also the co-convener of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development. So with that, I want to talk about this information, the frameworks related to the CSW. On the top left, we put financing for development. And that has been the primary work that I've been doing for about 20 years. It's a favorite of mine because I think that it's all about economics. But let me just tell you the importance around this. This is about women's economic justice. The financing for development process stemmed from the conferences of the 90s, where a lot of women's issues were highlighted and progressed. What happened is these mandates, Beijing, Cairo, social development, they did not have a link to funding. So governments, primarily from the global south, initiated this process to finance development. There have been 3 global conferences on financing for development in 2002. That was the very first one in Monterrey, Mexico, in 2008 in Doha, 2015 in Addis Ababa, and we have the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which has been guiding the financing for development process since then. The important thing now is that we're going to have a 4th conference on financing for development next year, 2025. Spain has announced that they will host it. And so what we're hearing now, and even what we heard last week at a briefing by the chair of the CSW Bureau, is that the CSW outcome document can influence the process of financing for development going forward. And so that's why it's really key. It's very important with the priority theme of poverty and financing institutions in brief, and the sub-thing on social protection, why we place financing for development at the top. Together with the Summit of the Future, which is on the right. And the Summit of the Future has been described as once in a generation opportunity to address inequities in global governance and reset international cooperation. Meaning that for the issue of financing institutions and the issue of poverty for the CSW, it is key that we provide inputs, strong inputs into the CSW outcome document, because as we heard, UN Women, the Bureau, the Commission is looking to this language to be able to provide inputs into the Summit of the Future process. The Summit of the Future will take place in September 22nd to 23rd, and we'll have agreed elements on steps forward for an action-oriented pact of the future, which will include 5 focus areas: sustainable development and financing for development, international peace and security, very important to our work, science, technology, innovation, and digital cooperation. We did all that work last year at the CSW on this. Youth and future generations, and transforming global governance. So let me move on to the human rights framework. You'll hear this at the CSW, and this refers to the human rights instruments that the UN has adopted, the UN Charter also in 1945, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and other instruments. So when you hear us talking about, when you hear at the CSW talking about human rights framework, we're really talking about all these human rights instruments that protect women and girls, gender-based discrimination, and protect, look at these anti-discriminatory laws and policies. And also looking at discriminatory social norms and harmful gender stereotypes. And ensuring that there's a more equitable and equal social structure and power relations for women and girls and people. The next framework that we're looking at here is the Beijing Platform for Action. As you may know, this is the blueprint for advancing women's rights and women's empowerment, adopted in 1995 as a defining framework for change It has made comprehensive commitments under the 12 critical areas of concern. And we are still using the Beijing Platform for Action at the CSW in terms of looking at the themes for review. We also have CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. This is a human rights treaty that is legally binding. Gender equality and women's rights are an intrinsic part of the human rights framework. And CEDAW is specific to uphold the principles of gender equality and non-discrimination. Next, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted in 2015. It outlines 17 goals, 169 targets to be met by all countries before 2030. So we are in the process of achieving those. It's a comprehensive agenda, which reaffirms previous agreements such as the Beijing Platform for Action and CEDAW. And we want to ensure that our work feeds into that process, which comes around July in the high-level political forum. So these are the frameworks. It's a lot of information that you're hearing, but please know that you can reference this information in an advocacy guide that we will announce, and these sessions are recorded so you could come back and review and just do your own research. But we just wanted to present these frameworks when you hear them at the CSW, that you're familiar with them. Next slide, please. So we wanted to also highlight key issues to watch at the CSW. Now, there are many, and you all bring your own specific agenda around the priority theme and sub-theme, but we wanted to highlight these as issues that have come up in the expert group meeting. I think you recall Luisa mentioned that, the expert group meeting, and those papers, they're online and you can look them up to do some more in-depth work. But these are some of the issues that we wanted to highlight. Equitable and progressive taxation. UN Women and colleagues doing work around tax justice have done tremendous work about progressive taxation. And we know that women are impacted differently by different types of taxes, whether they're called fees or, you know, they use other language or other means. Even women going to the market and they're charged to go to the bathroom, that's a fee, that's a tax. So this issue, because of the priority themes, will come up in the CSW, and we want you to take note of that. Reform of the international financial architecture. Why this? We want to look at the global economic governance because one, it relates to the priority theme in order to be able to achieve equitable financing for women and girls organizations and networks and financing institutions. A reform of the international financial architecture, the global governance, needs to happen. There are opportunities within the financing for development process, within the Summit of the Future process. So we want to ensure that you look into this as an area for promoting in your advocacy. Women's economic justice relates overall to these issues that we have below: debt justice, feminization of poverty, the care economy in financing institutions. Let me just say that this issue is going to be highlighted in the CSW through debt justice. We have selected debt justice as providing a recommendation, and you will hear about it in the next slide. But we feel that this is an opportunity, especially since the COVID pandemic. We've seen increasing debt for countries from the global south. And what it does is it depletes the national budgets for servicing a debt rather than providing for social protection mechanisms for women, for health, for education, for sustaining livelihoods. The feminization of poverty, that is, the gap between women and men and the cycle of poverty has continued to widen in the past decade. Particularly, we've seen this during the COVID pandemic. This is a phenomenon that's commonly referred to as the feminization of poverty, keeping women in this generational poverty. So we want to ensure that we're using appropriate language to really further our points. The care economy, we've seen during the past 3 years in particular, that experts have gauged the impact of the COVID pandemic on various productive industries of the global economy. And one of these is the care economy, which is those activities that people, primarily women, perform daily, often in homes, including chores of taking care of other persons, such as infants or the elderly or the sick in the case of the pandemic. And these chores are not paid. They are not remunerated, and some of them are not even considered productive. We have made some gains around highlighting this. There's the Global Compact on the Care Economy. So we want to be able to push this point during the CSW. And financing institutions, again, connected to the global reform of global governance to ensure equitable financing and to ensure that governments provide what they committed to many decades ago, which was 0.7% of their gross national product for aid to developing countries. And this is something that we want to ensure and push at the CSW. Next slide. Okay, so these are our recommendations for from the NGO CSW, compiled by the Advocacy and Research Group. I'm the chair of that Advocacy and Research Group, together with a colleague from the Executive Committee, Rahel Beagle, who I think I see there. And we worked with a very committed group of NGO colleagues, devised these 6 recommendations. So in brief, let me just read. The first one is on social justice and poverty, education and poverty, the intersection of women's poverty and climate change, gender bias and economic policy, the debt crisis, as I mentioned, and its impact on women. And then we have the 6th, which is a youth intersectional recommendation. These recommendations were sent to the Bureau of the CSW, the 45 member states of the Commission, and then to all of the member states of the UN, also to UN Women, to institutional stakeholders, and we have these and make them available to you to use as a tool for advocacy at whatever level you're doing, at the national level, at the global level, at the UN. And let me just highlight, well, I think you can read here, governments should adopt programs and policies that recognize gender equality as a requirement for social justice and development. That is for social justice and poverty, education and poverty, promote gender equality, and empower women and girls through a gender-sensitive curriculum free of harmful gender stereotypes, as well as making curricula and pedagogies relevant for today and tomorrow with the comprehensive and integrated system of education and lifelong learning. For 3, climate change, we recommend climate finance, a just transition, access to land and technology, and engaging the most impoverished and marginalized women and girls in effective, sustainable design and development of adequately financed policies and programs. On gender bias, we highlight, let me just try to move this here. A feminist gender analysis needs to be incorporated into economic policies to include its differentiated impact on women, including the impact of colonialism, on the debt crisis and its impact on women. Debt cancellation is needed for economic recovery and investing in gender-sensitive public services, the care economy, and climate resilience. Donor countries must fulfill their commitment of 0.7% GNP for ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, and earmark funds for women's rights organizations. And then the 6th, which is on the youth intersectional recommendation, youth, adolescents, and girls' engagement is critical to formulating, designing, and developing policies and programs regarding poverty, financing for development, and the economic empowerment of women and girls and other marginalized communities. This one was written by youth. There are more details on these recommendations in our online where we have these recommendations, and we are also compiling a list of resources and citations that will help buttress any argument that you want to make for your advocacy. And thank you very much for putting those recommendations in the chat. I know this is a lot of information, but again, we're just putting these tools there for you and making them available online and in this recording. So with that, Luisa, give it back to you, and I can take a drink of water.
Well, thank you, Rosa. We know that this is a lot of information, and mindful of that, and considering how much interest there is about building capacity to do advocacy effectively around CSW, is that NGO CSW decided to work a couple of years back on this advocacy toolkit, where you can go and look more into detail some of the ideas that we have presented for you here today. We know it's a very short time to go into depth. As I said, and Rosa said, it's a lot of information, but we do encourage you to go into the advocacy toolkit to get more detailed information and answers to some of your questions. And there you will see information around the UN system, understanding where CSW sits within the wider UN system, a brief overview of women's human rights at the UN, which, by the way, it needs to be said that this was an issue since the early days of the UN. So it would be interesting for you to also have that historical overview of women's human rights at the UN. And then some of these ideas that we presented today to you, how to advocate at CSW68, some questions around the NGO CSW68 forum, then the Advocacy and Research Group's key recommendations that my colleague Rosa just presented, and then some tips for digital advocacy, and and some more information and more details about some of the issues that we have been sharing with you today. To access the next slide, we'll show you the QR code for both our recommendations at NGO CSW for CSW68, and in that QR code, you can also download the Advocacy Toolkit. But my colleagues are also sharing some of the links in the chat box to access the toolkit, which is in our website as well as the recommendations. If I'm not wrong, I think we are now going to move then into the Q&A. We're going to try to answer some of the questions. I know that someone in the chat, Fiana Arbab, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. She said that, can you describe it a bit more, what the informal discussions are? The CSW agenda seem to list informal discussions with member states to inform the outcome documents. And outside of the events, parallel and side, where are other informal discussions happening? So when we talk about informal discussions, what it means is that when member states are negotiating the outcome document, they usually do it in the context of informal negotiations or informal discussions, meaning that the formal portion of these meetings are usually the meetings in which they are going to either adopt the document or just to finalize, like very, very last minute details on the document. But usually the substantive work and discussion of the outcome document happens in the context of informal negotiations. And one important point to take into account is that CSW is a UN body of limited composition. And please, can someone correct me? I think it is probably 65. I don't have the exact number of members of CSW. So it is not all member states of the UN participate as members of CSW. But one interesting thing is that when they are negotiating the agreed conclusions in the context of these informal negotiations, all member states of the UN participate in these informal discussions. So this is an important point to this question that is being asked. And then there are a number of parallel events like the NGO Forum, but also parallel events that happen at the UN building that are held by member states with a combination of UN agencies or civil society, and those are events that are open for those who can access the UN building and can register. Unfortunately, registration is only for ECOSOC accredited organizations, but you can also link up with some organizations are usually open to facilitate the participation of colleagues to come into the UN building and participate in the CSW. But so that's one question. I don't know if Rosa, over to you, if there's a question that you might want to answer.
Well, there was a question about if there was a prior recommendation on gender-based violence, and I put in the chat that and I neglected to mention, but these recommendations were first developed with the executive committee of the NGO CSW. We came up with a list of about 15. Then we put it out to our constituency, the over 45,000 in our listserv, and these were the top 5 priorities that people indicated for this CSW. Usually an issue will be related to the priority theme. That's why every year the recommendations are different. So we don't have one specifically on gender-based violence, but there may be one from last year, the year before, I'm not sure, but every year these priorities change. the recommendations change as with them as well. So that was one question I saw here. I don't know if there are any others.
There's a question about engaging. How can NGOs engage in the ministerial segment? You want to take that, Rosa?
I believe, and colleagues, co-chairs help me, there is a way to sign up for making presentations. I think that our colleague from UN Women indicated that will open closer to the CSW, where ECOSOC accredited organizations can sign up for being able to make a statement, a short statement for those segments. I think once we have that information, we will relay it, especially if you tune into our monthly meeting. We have a segment with a UN Women representative who answers all of those questions. So please tune into our next monthly meeting, and we will put the date in the chat.
And just to add, Rosa, that also for those who don't have the possibility of participating, making a statement in one of the ministerial roundtables, or there is always the possibility of tuning in via UN Web TV for those who want to follow the conversations and can have access to the room. These events are how do I say that word? I'm not a native English speaker. So yeah, they are broadcasted. That's another word. Live on the website of the UN. So I'd be happy to share the link shortly after we close this part. But yeah, it is a possibility to follow live. And there was another question. Anu Rutimi asked if we have any means of tracking the implementation of CSW recommendations by countries. I think to the point that we were discussing earlier, civil society organizations can try to attempt to document what their governments are doing. And yeah, I think it's there's not a set procedure or way that can be followed. It's more about civil society, the kind of work that we do, generally speaking, in following up what governments are doing and asking for and demanding for accountability, and sometimes working with governments as well in some of that implementation. So so I think it is up to individual civil society organizations, and hopefully this tracking and accountability of implementation can be something that civil society organizations can work together in coalition. It's an aspiration, but as of now, there's no platform for that in the context of CSW, but that would be something interesting to look into the future. But right now, you can do it locally and nationally. I don't know, Rosa.
There is a question. It came to me directly, and I won't reveal, but I will put the question out. Are there any ways to make recommendations about LGBTQI plus issues? Yes. I mean, if this is your advocacy priority theme, definitely using some of the tools and techniques that were presented here that are in the advocacy guide, you can prioritize some of the issues related to the priority theme. As a matter of fact, we are going to be having an LGBTQI caucus during the CSW, and I'm leading it. So you can be in touch with me, but I want to kick it off working with others. Of course, we have to do it together. So if you're interested in organizing that, please be in touch with me. I will put my email, it's my name, first and last name @gmail. That's the easiest. Please be in touch. There was also another question about LGBTI plus individuals and what they're experiencing. So please be in touch. I'm happy to form a small group and be able to prioritize this and do advocacy around it and make a recommendation. Sure. Thanks.
We're going to take one last question, and Priscilla Garces is asking about the statement. So to present a written statement contribution to CSW, first it has to be an ECOSOC accredited organization, and then the process for submitting a written contribution, a written statement, it starts sometime between I believe October, November. It's usually early on in preparation for CSW. So I would encourage you, if you want to engage in any stage of the process around CSW, not only submission of written statements, but also generally on the process of the expert group meeting, the SG report, anything related to the entire process and the information, go into the website of UN Women. I believe my colleagues have put it in the chat box throughout this meeting. So they usually post the information and the process for signing up for an oral statement, which is another possibility, and that usually opens shortly before a few months, I think around January, maybe February, they open the possibility for oral statements. And then sometime in October, November, usually with the deadline of December, it is the written contributions. So look for the information in the website. They're usually pretty good about posting what's coming up and explaining what, all these processes. So, and also NGO CSW shares this information through our newsletter, and in the monthly meetings, we share this information for folks to have that. So I think with this, we can close the Q&A and pass it over to Pam and Ivy to get us to the finish line with most gratitude to all of you for having listened to us today, and happy to be connecting offline in the future if need be. And thank you, everyone.
Oh, you need to unmute Pamela, I think.
Okay, thank you. Rosa and Luisa, what an informative session. And I'm going to ask our audience to join me in giving you a rousing round of applause. That was such a wonderful session, so informative. And you had little nuggets that you stuck in, and we are so appreciative. And as I said earlier, this is probably one of the most important sessions that any of us are going to experience around CSW, because you're teaching us how to be very deliberate in our attendance and our observations and what we take home. And I encourage everyone to be sure to download the Advocacy Toolkit, because it is a soup to nuts guide on what to do before CSW, during CSW, and then most importantly, after CSW. So with that, I'm going to close the meeting, and please watch your email, because we will be having meetings for parallel event organizers, for exhibit booth and handbook organizers, and others as well. And then there's going to be an important advocacy session during CSW. So again, thank you. And we have a final poll. How confident are you? How confident are you feeling engaging at the CSW this year after this training? Are you very confident, somewhat confident, or are you scared? You need more resources. So please respond. Okay, we'll give it another 60 seconds. Results, please. Excellent. So we have 32% who are very confident. That's fantastic. And then 61% who are somewhat confident and excited to learn more. Be sure for this 61% and for everyone, be sure to attend our monthly meetings so that you can learn more about the priority theme, and you will be able to hear from UN Women directly. And then we have 7% who are not very confident at all. And trust me, that is such a normal response. My first 2 years of attending CSW, I was completely overwhelmed because there was so much information. But eventually you will become confident. So again, please attend our meetings and reach out. Let us, reach out to us. And during CSW, if you see any of us, stop us and talk, and let's get a dialogue going. So with that, I'm going to, again, thank you for being here. And I'm going to close this session. Goodbye. In fact, would you please turn on your cameras so that we will be able to see you?
If we can remove the poll.
Yeah, if you can. Excellent. If you can turn your cameras on, and then we'll take a picture. And as is the tradition of NGO CSW, open your mics and we can bid each other a fond farewell until the next time. All right. Goodbye, everyone, and thank
All right,
you.
thank you,
Bye-bye.
Pam. Thank
Open
you,
your
everyone.
mics.
Adios.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye until the
Adios.
next time.